Good evening, everyone. I'm Billy. I'm an alcoholic. Welcome to Monday night. We are, wow, 56 degrees in Florida. So we are in a winter storm in Florida, 56 degrees. Um, anyway, I did want to make an announcement. I'll open with the serenity prayer. God, grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I did want to make a quick announcement because there are some people who come from my own area, Area 15, where I live. Um, and so I was so happy that a couple of weeks ago, the delegate did a communication roundtable about getting feedback, about getting communication from the conference and the office and the boards through the delegate to the groups and what works, what doesn't work. Big applause for that. And now the area chair in 2 weeks, or I guess Wednesday the 19th, is having a communication roundtable about communications from the area to the groups and the districts and the fellowship as a whole. So if you're in Area 15, please check out their website for that. So tonight, we are starting the exhibits. Now, if you have a blue service manual, page 95, Appendix A, AA's Legacy of Service, Bill W., written 1951. So this has moved places in the service manual the last couple of years. It doesn't matter whether I like that it used to be in the front, but I will stress, because I accept that it's Appendix A now, that it's as important as the traditions to be familiar with before somebody goes through the concepts of the service manual. Taking someone through the service manual or the concepts without having a foundation in the traditions, it just doesn't work. Now, if you happen to tune in, whether you're listening live or listening on a recording, there's no doubt that some of this information can help you. However, I would say the same thing if Joe and Charlie came out of the grave today and came on Zoom. They never were able to go on Zoom. I was just in Joe and Charlie country in Arkansas and Memphis, which is Joe and Charlie country as well. Sure, seeing them on Zoom would be great, but not like sitting down one-on-one with someone going through the big book. Same with the traditions, same with the legacy of service. The legacy of service is just such an important document, especially in the beginning, because it gets rid of one of the biggest urban myths in all of Alcoholics Anonymous. So I'm going to start. It says our 12-step carrying the message is the basic service that the AA fellowship gives. This is our principal aim and the main reason for our existence. So it's not talking about Alcoholics Anonymous existence. It's talking about the existence of the service structure. Therefore, AA is more than a set of principles. It's a society of alcoholics in action. We must carry the message, else we ourselves can wither, and those who haven't been given the truth may die. So not only the message, given the truth. And that's why I say, which someone told me and someone told them, if you're spending a lot of time discussing things that service things that aren't about carrying the message, they're really not that important. And by the way, we get confused here about carrying the message sometimes, because maybe we're debating the area convention or the state convention, or God knows what other stuff we do that I would put under the category of frothy. Nice, but frothy. Sure, some waiter or waitress or woman working behind the front desk might have an alcohol problem and might run into or be woken up to the fact that Alcoholics Anonymous exists. I don't doubt that that happens from time to time. But the primary purpose of most of those AA events is to reach AA members. It is not a prospect recruiting festival. We go to psychiatric centers and prisons to do that. That's how unique we are. So at most AA events, the people that attend already have the message or may be new, which obviously they can get set on fire at them, so they're great. But that's not the principal aim that we're talking about. The principal aim we're talking about is the service structure, enabling and facilitating groups and members to carry this message to alcoholics who are still suffering. That is the principal aim. And then it says, hence, an AA service is anything, whatever, that helps reach the fellow sufferer, ranging all the way from the 12-step itself to a 10-cent phone call and a cup of coffee, and to AA's General Service Office for the national and international action. The sum of all these services is our third legacy of service. So it's an important clarification there. General service is not third legacy. General service is part of the third legacy of service, one of many things that are part of that service. And then I love the next paragraph, because how many times have I had to see or get a phone call or an email or hear somebody say, even from a podium, that intergroups and central offices are not Alcoholics Anonymous. They're not part of AA. Part of AA is a definite phrase you have to be careful using. If you meant part of the general service structure, great. Intergroups are not part of the general service structure or central offices, unless it's Area 19, Chicago, where the central office is part of the general service area. But it says right here, services include meeting places, hospital cooperation, intergroup offices. They mean pamphlets, books, good publicity of almost every description. They call for committees, delegates, trustees, and conferences. And not to be forgotten, they need voluntary money contributions from within the fellowship. Sure, if you don't have money, is giving your time. One could argue whether that is doing service or giving a contribution or both. But I love this paragraph because it reminds us that we need voluntary money contributions to stay alive, and we only take them from our own members. The next section is vital to AA's growth. It says these services, when performed by individuals, groups, areas, or AA as a whole, are utterly vital to our existence and growth. Nor can we make AA more simple by abolishing such services. We would only be asking for complication and confusion. So there you go. For every time you run into someone who says, I don't care if New York goes away, I don't care if the conference goes away, we know the growth and the coordination of our service efforts are super, super important. And then Bill has it right there. Concerning any given service, we therefore pose one question: is this service really needed? If it is, then maintain it, or fail in our mission to those who need and seek AA. And then it says the most vital yet least understood group of services that AA has are those that enable us to function as a whole, namely the General Service Office, AA World Services, AA Grapevine Inc., and our Board of Trustees, known legally as the General Service Board of Alcoholics Anonymous. Our worldwide unity and much of our growth since early times are directly traceable to this cluster of life-giving activities. Until 1950, these services were the sole function of a few old-time AAs, several non-alcoholic friends, Dr. Bob and me. For all those years of AA's infancy, we old-timers had been the self-appointed trustees for Alcoholics Anonymous. So, a couple of things just to clarify there. Number one, not much has changed. The most vital yet least understood group of services. If you are outside your meeting hall, your structure, wherever you go to meetings, your group, it's still as least understood today as it was back then. Still as least understood. And then it talks about in 1950, the Alcoholic Foundation still existing, changing names to the General Service Board. And up until then, you know, at the beginning, it was 5 trustees, 3 non-alcoholic, 2 alcoholics, so that if the alcoholics drank, they could still do business and have a quorum. The next section, it says fellowship ready for responsibility. And it says at this time, we realized that AA had grown up, that our fellowship was ready and able to take these responsibilities from us. There was also another urgent reason for change. Since we old timers couldn't live on forever, new trustees would be virtually unknown to the AA groups now spread over the whole earth. Without direct linkage to AA, future trustees couldn't possibly function alone. And I would ask you, again, with your groups today, I would even ask you at an assembly. I would say less than 20% could even tell you who your regional trustee is. And I would say less than 10% could name off a couple of trustees. The trustees just as unknown today as they were then, and that's good. But we need the link. We need the group to the district, to the area with the delegate. And it goes on to talk about the conference. This meant that we had to form a conference representing our membership, which could meet yearly with our Board of Trustees in New York, and thus assume direct, I want to just stress that word, direct responsibility for the guardianship of AA tradition and the direction of our principal service affairs. Otherwise, a virtually unknown Board of Trustees and our too little understood service headquarters operation would someday be bound to face collapse. And direct responsibility, direction of our principal service affairs. When I hear people talk like the General Service Conference should just be an advisory body, it makes me worry a little bit. That does not coincide with what created the General Service Conference or what is in this legacy of service. Or when I hear people get upset when somebody has a question that they maybe think the board did something wrong or the conference did something wrong, like, yes, accept the group conscience. There's nothing wrong with taking your responsibility for direct oversight, direct guardianship, and asking questions. And it says on the next paragraph, suppose the trustees acting quite on their own were to make a serious blunder. Suppose that with no linkage to AA, they tried to act for us in a time of great trouble or crisis. With no direct guidance from AA as a whole, how could they do this? Collapse of our top services would be inevitable. And if under such conditions our world services did fall apart, how could they ever be restructured? And there have been decisions made over the history of the board where the board on second thought, you know what, maybe we should ask the fellowship, because they didn't get a lot of input and some of those issues wound up blowing up inside the fellowship. And it goes on to say the deliberative body known as the conference is made up of an elected area delegates from the United States and Canada, now numbering 93, together with the trustees, the directors of AAWS and AA Grapevine, and GSO and Grapevine staff members numbering 40 or more. The conference held its first annual meeting in 1951. Since then, it has met annually in April or May in New York. It has proven itself to be an immense success, establishing a record of advisory actions that have served the fellowship well during the intervening years of growth and development. So there's no doubt how important that linkage is in the General Service Conference. And then it goes on to highlights of AA history. It says, go back to the beginning. One day in 1937 at Dr. Bob's Akron home, he and I added up the score of over 2 years of work. For the first time, we saw that wholesale recovery of alcoholics was possible. We then had 2 small but solid groups in Akron and New York, plus a sprinkling of members elsewhere. How could these few recovered ones tell millions of alcoholics throughout the world the great news? That was the question, the great news. And that is the purpose of the service structure. Forthwith, Dr. Bob and I met with 18 of the Akron group at the home of T. Henry Williams, a steadfast non-alcoholic friend. Some of the Akron group thought we ought to still stick in the word of mouth process, but the majority felt that we needed our own hospitals with paid workers, and above all, a book for other alcoholics that explained to them our methods and results. Now, I want to stress that statement there because it stresses that we learn and are self-correcting. It says, but the majority felt we now needed our own hospitals. We don't need our own hospitals. But in the beginning, the majority felt that way. So we learn our lessons. This would require considerable money, millions perhaps. We didn't know that millions would have ruined us as even more than no money at all. So the Akron meeting commissioned me to get to New York and raise funds. Arrived home, I found the New York group in full agreement with this idea. Several of us went to work at once. And I love that comment, you know, we didn't know that millions would have ruined us, because I always say AA is a strange place. Not enough money, challenging. Too much money, a disaster. There's never you're going to meet a group of people who like to spend money when we have extra money, more than alcoholics. And it goes on in the next thing to AA's early money problems. Through my brother-in-law, Dr. L.V. Strong, Leonard Strong Jr., my only remaining friend and confidant of the worst of my drinking time, we made a contact with Willard Richardson, a friend and longtime associate of the Rockefeller family. Mr. Richardson promptly took fire and interested a group of his own friends. In the winter of 1937, a meeting was called at the office of John D. Rockefeller. Present were Mr. Richardson and the group, Dr. William D. Silkworth, alcoholics from Akron and New York. Dr. Bob and I, after a long discussion, we convinced our new friends that we urgently needed money, and we needed a lot of it. One of them, Frank Amos, made a trip to Akron in early 1938 to investigate the group there. He returned with a very optimistic report, of which Mr. Richardson quickly laid before John D. Rockefeller Jr. Though much impressed, Mr. Rockefeller declined to give us any large sum for fear of professionalizing AA. He did, however, donate $5,000. That was used to keep Dr. Bob and me going during 1938. That money was eventually paid back. We were still a long way from hospitals, missionaries, books, and big money. This looked mighty tough at the time, but it was probably one of the best breaks that AA ever had. I often think there's a meeting, it might still be there, a group. It's called Sober, Fun, and Promises on Friday night in Red Bank, New Jersey. I used to go there when I lived there. Every once in a while, it wasn't my home group, but I used to go there on anniversary night a lot. And I always loved the chairperson, because he would always make a special announcement. He would say, for all the families here tonight, I know this is going to shock you, but for the first time in your life, you're having something to do with your alcoholic relative, and we want no money from you. I know that's very odd for you because you've been supporting them for years or decades, but we don't want your money. And thank God Rockefeller knew better. Thank God he knew that we had to be responsible for our own fellowship. The next section is on AA as its own publisher. It says, then Frank Amos remembered his old-time friend Eugene Exman, religious editor at Harper's, the book publishers. He sent me to Harper's, and I showed Mr. Exman 2 chapters of our proposed book. To my delight, Mr. Exman was impressed. He suggested that Harper's might advance me $1,500 in royalties to finish the job. Broke as we were, that $1,500 looked like a pile of money. Nevertheless, our enthusiasm for this proposal quickly waned. With the book finished, we would be $1,500 in debt to Harper's. And if, as we hoped, AA then got a lot of publicity, how could we possibly hire the help to answer the inquiries, maybe thousands that would flood in? Then he says there was another problem too, a serious one. If our AA book became the basic text for Alcoholics Anonymous, its ownership would then be in other hands. it was evident that our society ought to own and publish its own literature. No publisher, however good, ought to own our best asset. And this gets real sketchy here, folks. So the two of us bought a pad of blank stock certificates and wrote on them, Works Publishing, par value $25. My friend Hank P and I then offered shares in a new book company to alcoholics and their friends in New York. They just laughed at us. Who would buy stock, they said, in a book not yet written? Somehow, these timid buyers had to be persuaded, so we went to Reader's Digest and told them, the managing editor, the story of our budding society and its proposed book. He liked the notion very much and promised that in the spring of 1939, when we thought the book would be ready, the Reader's Digest would print a piece about AA, mentioning the new book, of course. Then he says this was the sales argument we needed. With a plug like that, the proposed volume would sell by the carloads. How could we miss? The New York alcoholics and their friends promptly changed their minds about Works Publishing stock. They began to buy it, mostly on installments. Ruth Hawk, our non-alcoholic secretary, typed away as I slowly dictated the chapters of the text for the new book. Fierce argument over these drafts and I want to repeat that word. Fierce argument. It's nothing new in Alcoholics Anonymous that we get a little passionate when we debate or disagree. Should we be agreeable? Yes. Should we stop with the ugly name calling and raising our voices or clapping when somebody says something we agree with? That we should have a special section in the service manual that just calls for decorum at assemblies. No clapping if your candidate that you like gets elected. No clapping if something that you're really in favor of. That we just have dignity and respect for the process. It says, when the book project neared completion, we visited the managing editor of the Reader's Digest and asked for the promised article. He gave us a blank look, scarcely remembering who we were. Then the blow fell. He told how months before he had put out our proposition to the editorial board and how it had been turned down flat. With profuse apologies, he admitted he'd plumb forgot to let us know anything about it. This was a crusher. And then, I love this one. Meanwhile, we had optimistically ordered 5,000 copies of the book, largely on a shoestring. Worthless stock, a shoestring. The printer, too, had relied on Reader's Digest. Soon there would be 5,000 books in his warehouse and no customers for them. The book finally appeared in 1939. We got the New York Times to do a review, and Dr. Harry Emerson Fosdick supplied us with another really good one, but nothing happened. I want to repeat that. Nothing happened. The book simply didn't sell. We were in debt up to our ears. The sheriff had appeared at the Newark office where we had been working, and the landlord sold the Brooklyn house where Lois and I lived. She and I were dumped into the street and then onto charity of AA friends. So we talk about like everything was great after we left the gatehouse in Akron, or everything was great when the book was published. It was a complete disaster. There's no other way to put it into words. He says, how we got through the summer of 1939, I'll never know. I'll never quite know. Hank P had to get a job. The faithful Roop accepted shares in the defunct book company as pay. One AA friend supplied us with his summer camp, another with a car. Bill and Lois homeless, Dr. Bob paying his mortgage with the money that Rockefeller lent us. Things were tough. And then it says AA makes news. That's the next section. The first break came in 1939. Liberty Magazine, then headed by our great friend-to-be Fulton Ausler, carried an article, Alcoholics and God, written by Morris Markey. There was an instant response. About 800 letters from alcoholics and their families poured in. Just think about that. It wasn't the book. It wasn't the book review. It wasn't anyone else. It was good old public information. We take it for so granted today. 800 letters poured in We answered everyone, including a leaflet about the book Alcoholics Anonymous. Slowly, the book began to sell. Then the Cleveland Plain Dealer ran a series of pieces about Alcoholics Anonymous. At once, Cleveland groups mushroomed from a score into many hundreds of members. More books sold. Thus, we squeezed our way through the perilous year. People always say, how come Cleveland? You know, people say that, oh, you know, Cleveland, it was like New York, Akron, and then Cleveland blew up. Well, again, public information. Again, this article in the Cleveland Plain Dealer. It said we hadn't heard a thing from Mr. Rockefeller since early 1938, but in 1940, he put on a dramatic reappearance. His friend, Mr. Richards, came to a trustee meeting smiling broadly. Mr. Rockefeller said he wanted to give Alcoholics Anonymous a dinner. So here is the confusion that always happens in AA history. I have the Time magazine right here. February 19th, 1940, original copy. People always confuse the original meeting with Mr. Rockefeller with the dinner. That's where the confusion comes. Now, I love this article because if I could find it quickly. It's funny, today I was doing a seventh tradition workshop for the trustees in Iran, and I had this book out. But if you go to page 56 in that Time magazine, in the section under medicine, it says Alcoholics Anonymous. Right there. Alcoholics Anonymous. And on the other side, the article continues with a picture of Mr. Rockefeller. What I really love about it is the other half of the page is an ad for Martell Cognac Brandy, which that's not even legal today to have cigarette ads and booze ads. But right next to it, Martell Cognac and Brandy. Amazing. And it says, last week, one of the best-known teetotalers in the U.S., John D. Rockefeller, had 60 people to dinner. No cocktails were served, for several of Mr. Rockefeller's guests were members of Alcoholics Anonymous, a widespread, publicity-shy group of one-time guzzlers who have cured themselves. Psychiatrists now generally consider alcoholism a disease, specifically a psychoneurosis. Alcoholics generally drink not just because they like liquor, but to escape from something, a fixation, inferiority feelings, intolerable domestic situation, social or economic maladjustment. They may suffer the torments of the damned even while drinking themselves into stupor, and especially in the brief period between waking up with a remorseful, clattering hangover and getting down the first drink of the day. Psychiatrists try to help them by discovering the hidden reason for drinking and showing how it can be removed. But cynics in sanatoriums, watching a sober man walk out the door full of good intentions, often bet on how many days or weeks will elapse before he is back. About 5 years ago, a traveling salesman named Bill, after repeated alcoholic relapses, was pronounced hopeless by his doctors. Bill was an agnostic, but someone asked him if he couldn't believe that there was some higher power bigger than himself, call it God or whatever he liked, that would help him not to drink. The idea was thought, though Bill was always trying to let himself down, he might be more reluctant to let God down. Bill tried it, found that he had no trouble resisting the desire to drink. He was cured. He told his discovery to others, and the cure spread. These reformed drunkards call themselves Alcoholics Anonymous, now number about 400 in towns all over the U.S. I love this. They do their missionary work. We go away from that word missionary now, but we didn't write this article. What's amazing is when you think about John D. Rockefeller, that's like saying Warren Buffett held a dinner for Alcoholics Anonymous. That's like what it's saying today. It's absolutely amazing, and that it made Time magazine. It says the dinner came off early in February at New York's Union League Club, which is still there today, the Union League Club. Dr. Harry Emerson Fosdick spoke praise of us, and so did Dr. Foster Kennedy, the eminent neurologist. Then Dr. Bob and I briefed the audience on AA. Some of the Akron and New York alcoholics scattered among them. Notables at the table responded to questions. The gathering showed a rising warmth and interest. This was it, we thought. Our money problems were solved. If you read Al-Anon literature, history literature, this is where experience, strength, and hope comes from, not from AA. Although Al-Anon wasn't invented yet. But some of the alcoholics that went there that night asked, what should we tell this people? And Lois is the one who said, share your experience, strength, and hope. That's where that came from and started. It says Nelson Rockefeller then rose to his feet to speak for his father, who was ill. His father was very glad, he said, that at those at dinner had seen promising beginning of the new society. When Mr. Rockefeller had finished, the whole $1 billion worth of capitalists got up, walked out, leaving not a nickel behind them. Next day, John Rockefeller wrote to all those who attended the dinner and even to those who had not. Again, he reiterated his complete confidence and high interest. Then at the very interest of his letter, he casually remarked that he was giving Alcoholics Anonymous $1,000. We eventually paid that back, but not the millions that they were looking for. It says, at risk of personal ridicule, he had stood up before the whole world to put in a plug for a tiny society of struggling alcoholics. For these unknowns, he'd gone out way on a limb. While sparing of his money, he had given freely of himself. Then and there, John D. Rockefeller Jr. saved us from the perils of property management and professionalism. He couldn't have done more. That's the greatest gift he gave us, making us self-responsible. It's interesting. Nelson Rockefeller later went on to be vice president of the United States. Ikipa invited him to come. He could not make it, but in the Ikipa archives is a great letter from Nelson Rockefeller saying he couldn't attend, but how proud he was of Alcoholics Anonymous. The next page on 99, it says AA grows to 2,000 members. It says, as a result of the 1940 membership jumped sharply to about 2,000 at year's end. Dr. Bob and I began to receive $30 a week out of the dinner contributions. This eased us greatly. Lois and I went on to live in a tiny room in AA's at AA's #1 clubhouse on West 24th Street in Manhattan. Best of all, increased book sales had made a national headquarters possible. We moved from Newark, New Jersey, where the AA book had been written, to Vesey Street, just north of Wall Street district of New York. You can go to William Street in Newark to that building. The number is escaping my mind right now. But there is a plaque on that building that is where the original AA office was, that's where Hank and Bill and Ruth worked on the big book. So it's another stop on the AA history tour if you're ever going through there. And then he says the first office was on Vesey Street, just north of the Wall Street district of New York. We took a modest 2-room office right opposite the Church Street Annex post office. There, the famous box 658 was ready. So that's the box before box 459. Was ready and waiting to receive thousands of frantic inquiries that would presently come into it. At this point, Ruth, though non-alcoholic, became AA's first national secretary, and I turned into a sort of headquarters handyman. So sometimes we say Bobby B was the first national secretary. That is not true. She was a national secretary, but Ruth was the first one. Through the whole of 1940, book sales were the sole support of the struggling office. Every cent of these earnings went to pay for AA work done there. All requests for help were answered with warm personal letters. When Alcoholics Anonymous or their family showed continued interest, we kept on writing, aided by such letters in the book Alcoholics Anonymous. New AA groups begin to take form. So that's really where all the service office started. And then it says, beginning of group services. More importantly, we had a list of prospects in many cities and towns in the United States and Canada. We turned those lists over to AA traveling businessmen, members of already established groups. With these couriers, we corresponded constantly, and they started still more groups. His name is forgetting me, which is tragic. But this is how Ireland got AA. What's his name? Colin. I'm forgetting his last name. Connor. I'll leave his last name for his family disclosed if they want to. But he went to Ireland on a business trip, and that's how Ireland got the first AA in Europe. Somebody on a business trip. Then came an unexpected activity. Because the newborn groups saw only a little of their traveling sponsors, they turned to the New York help with their innumerable troubles. By mail, we relayed experience of the older centers onto them. A little later, as we shall see, this became a major service. Meanwhile, some of the stockholders in the book company began to get restive. All the book profits, they complained, were going for AA work in the office. When, if ever, were they going to get their money back? So you see this? Worthless stock certificates. We also saw the book Alcoholics Anonymous should now become the property of AA as a whole. At that moment, it was owned 1/3 by the 49 subscribers, 1/3 by my friend Hank P, and the remainder by me. So that's who it says owned the big book originally. As a first step, we had the book company Works Publishing audited and legally incorporated. Hank P and I donated our shares of it into the Alcoholic Foundation, as our board of trustees was then called. This was the stock that we had taken for services rendered, but the 49 other 9 subscribers had put in real money. They would have to be paid in cash. Where on earth would we get it? The help we needed turned up in the person of A. Leroy Chapman, a friend and associate of John D. Rockefeller. He had recently been made a trustee of the foundation. He persuaded Mr. Rockefeller, 2 of his sons, and 2 of the dinner guests to lend the foundation $8,000. So now he has $5,000, then $1,000, now another $8,000 loan. This promptly paid off $2,500 in indebtedness to Charles B. Towns, settled some incidental debts, and permitted the reacquisition of the outstanding stock. 2 years later, the book Alcoholics Anonymous had done so well that we were able to pay off the whole Rockefeller loan. So that's really the story of where the money came and went. Another thing to be, there is a royalty deal. There is a royalty agreement. If you've never seen it and you want it, you can email me. Yes, Bill and Hank gave their shares, but then at that time it was called AA Publishing Inc. Did give Bill W. a royalty deal where he did receive income on sales of the big book for the rest of his life. Sometimes people say Bill W. became rich off the big book. That would not be true. What would be true is Lois became very wealthy off the big book. If you look at big book sales up until the time Bill died in 1971, not a lot. If you look at big book sales between 1971 and when Lois died, yeah. And, you know, that's an interesting transition because I don't need to go into the history of where Bill and Lois lived, but you can visit stepping stones. Bill had the money to buy a small piece of property there. Then he bought a couple of acres as the lots became available next to it. But Lois tried to leave the royalties and the property and the house to the General Service Board of Alcoholics Anonymous. And they turned it down. They turned it down because AA doesn't own property and too much property and prestige there. They also would not take the royalty agreement back because that now belonged to an individual. Worse, now it belonged to an individual who's not in AA. Lois. Lois then went to Al-Anon and offered to give stepping stones to Al-Anon. The Al-Anon Board of Trustees refused, just like AA. That's why today we have the Stepping Stones Foundation. Lois had the Stepping Stones Foundation created, a non-AA entity that their sole purpose is to take care of the house that one of the co-founders lived in, like the non-AA entity that owns Dr. Bob's house, Dr. Bob's Home Incorporated. Their purpose is to take care of Dr. Bob's house and to pass on that history. Top of 100 is Jack Alexander looks at AA. And the spring of 1941 brought us a 10 strike. The Saturday Evening Post decided to do a piece about Alcoholics Anonymous. It assigned one of its star writers, Jack Alexander, to the job. Having just done an article on the New Jersey rackets, Jack approached us as somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but he soon became an AA convert, even though he wasn't an alcoholic. Working early and late, he spent the whole month with us. Dr. Bob and I and the elders of the early groups of New York, Akron, Cleveland, Philadelphia, and Chicago spent uncounted hours with him. When he could feel AA in the very marrow of his bones, he proceeded to write the piece that rocked drunks and their families all over the nation. It was the lead story in the Saturday Evening Post of March 1st, 1941. Then came the deluge. Frantic appeals from alcoholics and their families, 6,000 of them. Think of those numbers. The world wasn't as big as it is today. 6,000 from that article hit the New York office. At first, we pawned at random thought of mass letters, laughing and crying by turns. How could this heartbreaking mail be answered? It was a cinch that Ruth and I could never do it alone. Form letters wouldn't be enough. Remember that if you're involved in AA service. Form letters wouldn't be enough. Let's see. Every single one must have an understanding personal reply. Maybe the AA groups themselves would help. Though we'd never asked anything of them before, this was surely their business if it was anybody's. An enormous 12-step job had to be done. We had started the year 1941 with 2,000 members, but we finished with 8,000. 6,000 member growth in 1941. This was the measure of the great impact of the Saturday Evening Post piece. But this was only the beginning of an uncounted thousands of pleas of help from individuals and growing groups all over the world, which have continued to flow into the general service office to this day. This phenomenal expansion brought another problem, a very important one. The national spotlight now being on us, we had to begin dealing with the public on a large scale. Public ill will could stunt our growth, even bring it to a standstill. But enthusiastic public confidence could swell our ranks to members we had only dreamed of before. The Post piece had proved this. Finding the right answers to all our public relations puzzles had been a long process. After much trial and error, sometimes punctuated by painful mistakes. That's what AA Comes of Age is, a book of painful mistakes. The attitudes and practices that would work best for us emerged. The important ones can today be seen in our AA traditions. 100% anonymity at the public level. No use of the AA name for the benefit of other causes, however worthy. No endorsement or alliances. One single purpose for Alcoholics Anonymous. No professionalism. Public relations by the principle of attraction rather than promotion. These were some of the hard-learned lessons. That's basically a description of what the book AA Comes of Age is about. The next section is titled Service to the Whole of AA. Thus far in our story, we have seen the foundation, the AA book, the development of pamphlet literature, the answered mass of pleas for help, the satisfied need of groups for counsel on their problems, the beginning of our wonderful relations with the public, all becoming part of a growing service to the whole world of AA. At last, our society really began to function as a whole. But the 1941 to 1945 period brought still more developments of significance. The Vesey Street office was moved to Lexington Avenue, New York City, just opposite Grand Central Station. That's where the box 459 address comes from. The moment we located there, we were besieged with visitors who, for the first time, began to see Alcoholics Anonymous as a vision for the whole globe. Since AA was growing so vast, GSO had to grow. More alcoholic staff members were engaged. As they divided the work between them, departments began to be created. Today's office has a good many: group, foreign, and public relations, AA conference, office management, packing, mailing, accounting, stenographic, and special services to loners, principals, and hospitals. When I started as a non-trustee director on the AA World Services Board in 2009, there was still one person left in the mailroom who worked there when Bill W. was there. He retired while I was a director. It was chiefly from our correspondence and from our mounting public relations activity that the basic ideas for our traditions came. In late 1945, a good AA friend suggested that all of this massive experience might be codified into a set of generally simply stated principles that could offer tested solutions to all of AA's problems of living and working together and a relating of our society to the world outside. I want to point in right there what it has in common with the Big Book. If you go to any Big Book study, whatever, they always say the steps are written in the past tense. We're not saying what'll happen to you. We're telling you what happened to us. Here it says the traditions are the same. It says a friend suggested that all this mass experience be codified into a set of generally simply stated AA principles that offer tested solutions, meaning in the past. What already worked, that's what the traditions were. It said if we become sure enough of where we stood on such matters as membership, group autonomy, singleness of purpose, non-endorsement of other companies, professionalism, public controversy, then such a code of principles could be written. Such a traditional code could not, of course, ever become rule or law, but it could act as a guide for our trustees, for headquarters people, and most especially for AA groups with bad growing pains. Well, we all know today those bad growing pains haven't gone away. They keep going, maybe bigger and more complicated. Being at the center of things, we of the headquarters would have to do the job. Aided by my helpers, there I set to work. The traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous that resulted were first published in the so-called long form in the Grapevine, 1946. Then I wrote some more pieces explaining traditions in detail. These later came out in later issues of the Grapevine. You can go to the Grapevine Digital Archive, put in the word tradition or traditions, and the first 12 articles that will come up will be the essays. Each tradition was an essay. So obviously there were 12 of them. And then it says the traditions took persuasion. The first reception of the 12 traditions was interesting and amusing. The reaction was mixed, to say the least. Only groups in dire trouble took them seriously. From some quarters, there was a violent reaction, especially from groups that had long lists of protective rules and regulations. There was much indifference. Several of our intellectual members cried loudly that the traditions reflected nothing more than the sum of my own hopes and fears for Alcoholics Anonymous. And it says, therefore, I began to travel. Bill started to travel and talk about the traditions. People at first were politely attentive, though it must be confessed that some did go to sleep during my early harangues. But after a while, I got letters containing sentiments like, Bill, we'd love to have you come and speak. Do tell us where you used to hide your bottles and all about that big hot flash spiritual experience of yours. But for heaven's sake, please don't talk any more about those blasted traditions. Sometimes I'll tell that story and people are like, is that made up? No, it's in the legacy of service. It's right there in our literature. Time presently changed all that. Only 5 years later, several thousand AA members meeting at the 1950 Cleveland Convention declared that AA's 12 traditions constituted the platform on which our fellowship could best function and hold together in unity for all time to come. So it makes clear, hold together in unity for all time to come. And I just got word. I'm so excited. We'll see if it happens. In 2005, there was a convention held in St. Louis. It was the 50-year celebration of AA coming of age, because that happened in St. Louis in the Kiel Auditorium when Bill, on behalf of him and Bob, turned AA over to the groups. Well, I just got word that there is a group of people working in Cleveland right now. They want to have a conference to celebrate the first international convention in Cleveland and the ratification of the traditions and how important that day in AA was. And I wish them the best. And if they have it, I will register for sure and do my best to be there. So I think I'm going to end there on page 101. We will finish the rest of Legacy of Service next week. But I will go to questions. Please send them in via chat. Okay, one question. Is it true that Bill W.'s family received royalties? Complicated question. Lois, obviously, was Bill's heir. All you have to do is Google Bill W. last will and testament, and there's plenty of AA history sites that have it. The royalty agreement as well. Bill was allowed to pass on once his royalties in the big book. They were not allowed to be passed on after that. So obviously Lois received the majority. There were some other family members that received some of the share of the royalties of the big book. It's very interesting. While I was serving as a director, there was one heir left, still receiving her 150th of the royalties or whatever, living in a senior living facility in Florida. She lived to like 104. Every quarter, as per the agreement, she would get her royalty check. And every quarter, and of course, because, you know, generations change, but every quarter she sent in a handwritten thank you note to AA World Services. I see a question came in, so let's see. Can you describe how the number of area delegates increases? Sure. I don't have my file on that exactly in front of me, but we have 93 areas today. If you want an original service manual, please send me an email and I'll send you the original areas. But as AA populations grew, some states that started as one state, one delegate states, became 2 or 3 delegate states. Some areas themselves needed to divide. There is a process. There is an actual application that you have to fill out as an area if you want to create a new delegate area. The last time that happened was in 1999. That would be Area 93, which used to be part of Area 5. in California. That's the last time that happened. Before that, Area 92, and whatever area Washington is, but the state of Washington was one area. Now today it is two, Eastern and Western Washington. The process is detailed out in that form. The area has to submit it to the conference secretary, where it then goes to the conference policy. My brain is escaping me. Not the agenda committee, but the you'll look it up. Starts with policy, but they get to weigh on that and make a recommendation or take no action. Eastern Washington, Western Washington, the conference committee made a recommendation to the conference floor, and it was passed. 1999, the conference committee took no action. The floor action was made by the Area 5 delegate, who just rotated out, believe it or not, as trustee at large. That would be Marita. At that time, she was Marita H. Marita H. Made that motion, and the conference approved it as a floor action. But you should, you can ask your delegate to get you that current application, and what the procedure is. What year and month was Time Magazine? Okay. February 19th edition, 1940. Was in a group a part of the Chicago area from the formation of Area 19? Can you talk about the benefits of having it part of an area? So the Chicago office, much to the chagrin of many other people, was technically the first AA office, even though it might not have been called one. If you read a story in the big book, I'm trying to think of that lady's name. Is it Sonia? I want to say. Anyway, her story is in the big book. It's a crazy, wicked AA story. There was a crazy, self-described, I'm not calling her crazy, but she was a crazy bad alcoholic. She came from a super rich family, and she was divorced, which I'm not judging her. I'm just telling you, back then, she got sent to Akron because they heard about Alcoholics Anonymous. The women of Akron threw her out of Akron. That is the true story. They told the men, AA members, you need to get her out of here. She then had a legendary trip on the train filled with soldiers returning from the war, where she drank the whole way back. She was a wild child, but she got sober again. And since she had money and her family had buildings, they opened up an AA office. It's not Irma. It's, hold on. It'll come to me. So that office, but since the area was created, Area 19, the office became part of the area. Now the question was the benefits of it. So I have the experience of, oh, somebody just told me. Thank you for looking it up when I couldn't. Sylvia K. Since she is, I'll give a little advisory action plug here. Since I am not her family can break around anonymity at the public level, not me. And somebody said they didn't need to look it up, which is awesome. That is awesome. Um, anyway, uh, I got sober in New York and moved to Chicago for work. I was used to in a group being separate from general service. So when I first got there, I thought it was crazy. I thought it was insane. Um, I left there believing it's the biggest mistake we ever made in AA. I spoke with a couple of other past trustees on a panel a couple of years ago, and in other parts of the world, in a group is part of the general service structure. I'm not saying turn back the clock, but what a benefit it was to have the central office reporting to the area finance committee and it all one, no arguing over whose committee does what, all contributions coming to one place. I'm a big fan of that structure. As I understand it, Tradition 2 introduced group conscience into how group decisions ought to be made. Concept 1 introduced an informed group conscience and an overwhelming majority, usually 2/3 of the vote. Before 12 concepts, how did groups define group conscience? Simple majority. I would tell you that it was the election process that first became the three legacy procedure, and then advisory actions with 2/3 per the conference charter. The informed group conscience that's talked about in concept 1 is then later talked about in the AA group pamphlet. But all information we have is that majority ruled early on in Alcoholics Anonymous groups. Is it true Bill had the trustees give some shares to a female friend of he and Lois? It's true that Bill, in his will, gave out shares to family members and people that were important to him and Lois. Why didn't Bob have shares in the big book? Good question. Bill was credited as the primary writer. There's actually some good AA, good old history. George, who passed away, loved this story. The Smith family big book, as some of you may know, the Smith family sold a bunch of the early Smith archives to Brown University. They sit in Brown University's archives. That was their decision. It was their property. The original coffee pot, if you want to see it, you got to make an appointment to go to Brown University archives. The Smith family offered the original big book belonging to Dr. Bob and Ann Smith to the General Service Board. George was at a regional forum where somebody asked a question and said, I heard that the General Service Board paid $10,000 for the Smith family big book. And at his first regional forum as general manager, George said, no way. We don't pay for archives. Whoever told you that, they just made up a story. And so when George got back to the staff meeting the following Wednesday, he reported to the staff that he got a crazy question about that the General Service Board had bought the Smith family book for $10,000. And he told them there was no way that was true. And a staff member named Joni M., great staff member, Joni, from Texas, who went on to work at the General Service Office. And she said, George, honey, you had that halfway true. They didn't pay 10,000, they paid 20. Now the General Service Board decided at that time that since the Smith family had received no book revenue at all, that they were going to purchase that book. It's the last archive that we ever purchased, and the first one. But no, the Smith family or Dr. Bob was not in the royalty agreement. That belonged to Bill. I would rather not go into the rabbit hole of conspiracy theories. The history is what it is. Some people agree with it. Some people disagree with it. You know, it's just our history. The beauty of AA should be that good, bad, indifferent, we should just learn from it always. So if that's it, next week we will take up where we left off tonight in the legacy of service. But thanks everyone for being here. Really appreciate it. Have a great night. We will close with the responsibility statement. I am responsible when anyone anywhere reaches out for help. I want the hand of AA always to be there. And for that, I am responsible. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you.